I've had a lot of wonderful things happen to me in my life. I was married to this woman for 10 years. And I've been friends with Tim Wirth for close to 40 years. Tim, when I was looking for somebody to head up the United Nations Foundation, I gave Tim consideration, not only because he was a trusted friend whose ability was unquestioned, but he was dedicated to donating his life to make life better for others. And that's what I've tried to do as well. I looked over, I didn't use a headhunter, and I didn't interview anybody else but him for the job. And I already knew he had served 12 years in the House of Representatives, 6 years in the U.S. Senate, which gave him a good background in government, and 5 years in the State Department in the International Affairs Department, which we had to have somebody to run the UN Foundation who had an international perspective and knew a lot about the rest of the world, because the United Nations Foundation was planned and plotted out to do as much good in the world as possible, not just in the United States. That would just be part of it. So, and Tim didn't let us down. He did a wonderful job, and still working really hard too, and tells me he's going to hang around as long as he can, and I'm going to do the same thing. God bless you. And Tim, would you come up and receive the Champion for Global Change Award? Come on.
So Ted says to me, you're supposed to say something. If you've ever had a chairman like Ted, this incredible impatience, sense of urgency, and why haven't you done it already? He's a wonderful, wonderful chairman and a phenomenal visionary. And Ted, it's been a great pleasure to spend 15 years bringing to reality your dream. And I think we've done that. I want to tell you just a few stories, if I can. It's probably important to begin, where this began, which was in the basement or on the first floor of a hotel in Georgetown, where Ted and Jane and Ren and I were supposed to have dinner. It was after an event at the Clinton White House, and it was a climate event that we'd organized in the State Department. And we were all supposed to be out of there by 7 o'clock and then meeting for dinner at 7:15. It was a Clinton event, and then Ted and Jane and Ren went for dinner. And the Clinton event goes on and on and on. And I got to dinner at about 8:30 or 8:45. Ted's ready to go to bed, sleep. He's out at 7:30, Turner's gone. I walked in the door of this hotel room, and there was a table that they were sitting at in the far corner. And of course, everybody in the room is looking at Ted and Jane, so who's here and what are they doing? So Ted says, the minute I walked in the door, he said, "Hey, Wirth, you want to run this foundation?" So that's where it all began. I went down to Atlanta a couple of days later, and we looked at all of the tapes. And Ted had said, in those tapes, not that he was going to give $1 billion to the UN, but that he was going to give $1 billion to UN causes. That made it a very significantly different challenge, because if we could use the funding for UN causes, there was real potential leverage in that, and that, I thought, is what we needed to do. So I went up to Ted's office, and I said to him, Ted, did you know that you said this? And he'd done an interview for CNN and another one for Newsweek. And did you know that you said this? And he looked up and he said, oh, thank God I said that. Of course, he knew all the way along he'd said it at every stop, and he knew exactly what it was that we were going to try to do. So we began. David Harwood is here, a trusted counselor of mine for many, many years. David and I started in a borrowed office in the old National Academy building in Washington. We had a first board meeting. There was a talk here of planning and so on. We had a first board meeting with Emma Rothschild, who's here, Andy Young, former ambassador to the UN, Ted and I, about what we were going to do with this fund. We met at 10 o'clock one morning, and at 11 o'clock we sent a note over. This is 1 hour. We sent a note over to Kofi Annan saying what we think we'd like to do is to focus on 3 issues: children's health, women's reproductive health, and climate and the environment. 1 hour of planning. It probably took us that long to get seated around the table. Everybody knew just what they wanted to do, and those priorities have stayed with us and been deeply focused for the last 15 years. It has been a remarkable journey to watch this grow. To watch it grow in the context of what the UN can think about. This was all new to the UN. To use the UN's name was something that they are very, very chary about and letting somebody do. What did Ted Turner want? What was all this money going to do? And by the way, why don't you just give it to us and we'll spend it, and don't worry about setting up any other kind of a mechanism. We had to formalize all this in a very, very complicated negotiation agreement, and Ted's son-in-law and our lawyer, Rutherford Seidel, is here somewhere. Rutherford and David Harwood did this together, a very, very complicated negotiation, but one that has stood us in good stead, sort of setting the rules as to how this new instrument and this set of new ideas was going to be carried out. We very soon decided that what we wanted to do was to organize around a few big ideas. Kofi Annan called me in one day and he said, you know, we've had a couple of years' experience. My feeling is that what we ought to try to do is to focus on a few big ideas. Take your resources and don't do a lot of small things. Do a few very big things, a few very big ideas. He said, let's work on the problems without passports, his words. Let's work on the problems without passports. So we somewhat shifted our focus and developed a strategy where we would take a big idea or a big problem and organize all of our resources around that. The resources that we had, limited but significant financially, the human resources, our capacity to convene people, our relationship with the UN, and in a wonderful emerging way, a lot of different partnerships with the private sector who wanted to help to undertake the solution to these problems. So we developed this campaign strategy and now run about 12 or 15 campaigns. And you saw some sense of that here tonight. Kathy Calvin, who's taking over from me, has done a wonderful job. She's a great manager, much better manager than I, and a great vision in terms of all the women's and the girls' programs, and those are really Kathy's doing, to see these getting rooted now very close to the Secretary General's priorities. My own sense of priority was climate change and what we ought to be doing in terms of climate disruption. And Kathy and I will never forget the breakfast we had with Ban Ki-moon when he began. Even before he was sworn in, we had breakfast with him one Sunday morning, and we thought we were going to get a quite traditional bureaucrat coming out of a foreign ministry. all Ban Ki-moon wanted to talk about was women and climate change. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Here was this, you saw him tonight. Here's this amazing man who grew up in deep, very, very deep poverty at the end of the Korean War, when there was absolutely nothing except the UN providing foods and UN peacekeeping troops providing some security. He's always remembered that, comes back to that, and out of that has grown his very, very deep commitment to what he does. And we're deeply committed to the guidance that he and Kofi Annan, his predecessor, have given to us at the UN Foundation. We now are moving on to a next generation of leadership, and Kathy has done a wonderful job. We had a board meeting in the last 2 days, presentations from extremely talented, sort of the 35 to 40-year-old level of people taking on major pieces of responsibility, and I could feel that transition, a very, very important one. I could feel our sense of having been successful with some very big partnerships. We see one with General Electric. We've had others with Motorola, and other Microsoft, others that have Johnson & Johnson. Some very major partners who've been engaged and really like to use us as a way of becoming engaged with the United Nations. Watching the kind of partnership, that's a very different way, as Bob Orr said, a very different way of doing business. And I think we've done a lot to help the UN to do that. We've grown. We're now an institution of about 220 people, believe it or not, with these many, many campaigns and these very good managers and a lot of momentum going into the future. I was asked by the board if I would be willing to stay on the board as a member of the board, and I said that I would like to do that. And I've had this relationship with Ted for 40 years, so why stop now? It's always incredibly interesting. And that I also was asked to stay and help with the item that has been of deepest concern to me, the issue of climate change. We have, I don't need to tell all of you, an enormously huge challenge ahead of us. The data are not good. You know, there's a kind of foreboding out there about climate and what we are facing in this world. And the urgency gets greater and greater every day. We have at the UN Foundation a very close relationship with the scientific groups around the world. We've been deeply involved in the Secretary General's new initiative for providing energy to the 1.3 billion people in the world who don't have it, and to increase significantly energy efficiency and renewables. We've been very involved with the Turner Foundation in a wonderful initiative called the Energy Future Coalition, sort of a hotbed of ideas and thinking, and many members of the Energy Future Coalition are here today. We have a lot of weapons for doing this, not weapons, but we have a good platform to take on this issue and raise it up 3 or 4 steps. As I said to the board, climate change, unhappily, is an issue which can fade away. It's perishable. It's a perishable issue. If we don't do it now, we will never have the chance to do it. We have to do it now. And the board has responded in a very positive way, and let me define what is meant by positive. As we had that discussion extensively yesterday and today, the board said, this can be a major downer, but we have the opportunity to think differently about this and think about climate change as a very, very significant opportunity. That it's an opportunity to dramatically change the economic model which we depend upon. It's a very significant opportunity to change the way in which we think about fossil fuels in our society. It's a very significant opportunity for looking at economic development. You can't possibly have economic development without at the same time providing modern energy services to the poorest people. And as our Cook Stove campaign and other women's health initiative shows, it's a very significant way to increase the health and well-being, particularly of women and mothers around the world. So let's put it in that way. The boards, it was such an interesting discussion. We've never had this kind of a discussion before. But this remarkable board, and if you all want to see it on page 9 of the program, all the board members are listed. We had this discussion about how do we put this in a positive fashion? How do we take these as opportunities and get the language to change, get people, as Reed Dutchin, our very good head of all of our energy programs, saying people aren't going to take on a problem if they think the solution is going to be something that's really catastrophic for them. So how do we make that shift? It's a very real challenge, and it's the biggest challenge of all. I can think of nothing that I want to continue to spend my productive time on than thinking about climate, what we do about climate, how we bend the curve on climate, and how we engage more and more people. Ted believes that to his core as well. The first 3 things that he's always wanted to do: climate, population stabilization, and getting rid of nuclear weaponry. We have a sister organization, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, that is working on the nuclear weaponry side. We have the 2 highest priorities, I think, in the foundation of thinking about women's reproductive health and working on climate change. It has been, give you this brief history, it has been a wonderful journey. I feel so lucky to have been able to meet so many first-class people, some great ambassadors. A number of perm reps are here tonight, ambassadors from all around the UN, who are the people that really make the UN go. They're the board of directors of the UN. Some terrific people who helped us. Bill Lures is here, Tom Pickering is here, major figures in the foreign policy establishment who are committed to helping to make the UN go. Ted, we've been very lucky to have a lot of help from a lot of great people. And all of you are part of that now. Some of you have been involved in this before, some of you haven't. But the challenges of the UN, the extraordinary mission that the world has given the UN, the fact that the UN is so underfunded, so misunderstood, but is the institution of last resort, as you can see here, and you can see in feeding 60 million people a day, housing millions and millions and millions of refugees. It's to the UN that the world comes when systems fall apart and don't work. It's been a great privilege to be part of that, and I thank you all very much for coming. And I want to particularly, again, thank Ted. He's been a great boss, and we've had a wonderful, wonderful relationship, and I look forward to that continuing and to have those same impatient memos and telephone calls come over the transom and say, "What happened to that anyway?" Thank you all very much.